about that. It's my privilege to present you Phillip McIntyre from Australia, from beaches. He's from University of Newcastle, and Phillip has been here for the weekend where we have, as you know, the Art of Record Production Conference. And these guys are master students, and we are missing two or three. But some are ill, so they won't show up. But we're a very small class, so
That's a very good class.
Very good, yeah. Very welcome, Phil.
Thank you. I'm just going to start off by telling you a little bit about myself, so you've got some idea of how to locate me. Then I'm going to talk about probably the basis of my research. And also, this paper was published in 2008 that I was about to draw all this information from. And I've got a copy here on the stick, so I might just leave it on your laptop. And the PowerPoints you can access, and also the paper as well. So if that helps with you taking notes, that's fine.
Yeah.
But that paper kind of sets out the, I would say the deep framework in most of my research. I've been researching creativity at least since 1994 and been publishing on this since. So I might tell you a few stories about that as well as we go. So most of it is going to be fairly conceptual, relatively abstract. So your master's students, I figure you can handle all of that. And with some examples sprinkled through it. That's probably the best thing. And I'm going to get down to some relatively philosophical concepts as well as we go through. So it's the deep background in terms of the research into creativity worldwide. So, just about myself, this is the city that I come from. I've been there for the last 32 years. This is where I've raised my children and so on. And the university that I attend is, you can't actually see it, but it's way over there. And I live just here, about 5 minutes walk from this beach.
Wow.
Nice. It is. It's lovely. In fact, I can walk outside my front door and I can see straight down into this part of the harbour, straight through here. So it's a really lovely place to be. Here's a whole pile of pictures of myself from my first gig when I was 17 through to I'm still working. I've produced one album and one EP for a young band and a couple other things this year. So I've done a fair amount of things. So your life flash before your eyes right there. So I've got some experience inside the world that I'm talking about. So I've done quite a number of things, apart from performance across that whole period of time. I'm primarily a guitar player, but also a songwriter, vocalist. I've even been paid to play drums at one point. But I'll tell you how well I play. I was in a band called the Rhythm Busters, so that tells you something about my rhythm skills. Busting a lot of rhythms. I've also worked as a music journalist. I've got to interview quite a number of people. That's John Fogerty there, who you may remember, may not remember, from Queen's Clearwater Revival, but also people like David Bowie, all sorts of people really. I've made music videos, I've made documentaries, I worked in music retail for a while, actually in the mid to late 80s, when the digital world really started to take off in terms of drum machines, sequences, samplers and all those sorts of things. But continually working all the way through. So, here's another big picture, so you can get some idea of the level that I was working at. This is a band called Loris and the Carlos. This is a festival that we played at, but I'd spend a lot of my time now here. This is part of the studio that we have at the University of Newcastle. It's part of a complex. We have a sound recording studio, we have a radio studio, and we have a television studio, all of which are linked to each other. So we can do live sound through this with television productions and so on. So it's a great learning environment. In fact, what I was saying a little earlier to the group that I'm learning as well. Probably a teacher teaches most what they need to learn, so I'm continually picking things up. So I've taken that whole professional experience and turned it into those teaching processes, but also researching as well. In fact, this model here has been central to my work, and this person here, I have had a number of PhD students go through, some of whom are now my colleagues, some of whom are working all around the world, But Susan was a PhD student of mine, and this is where she first came across these ideas, and she's since taken those ideas and moved them forward in her own way. So things are being returned all the time. That's the thing that I really want to talk about, that particular model right there. So she's focused on creative practice. I would just simply put creativity in the middle of this. It's not just about processes or products or practices or whatever, but the whole thing. So that's really where I want to go. Now, imagine you're doing research at master's level, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Well, there are probably three questions that you're all asking, even though you don't know you're asking them. But it's certainly the case for my master's students and my PhD students and myself as well. But every project that you come into in terms of research has three questions that you're trying to answer. What do we already know? What and how can I know about it myself? And then what does it mean? So, the first question really is about literature review, what we already know about whatever the topic is. In my case, when I was doing my doctoral research, it was about songwriting. What do we already know about that? It turned out I knew quite a lot about creativity, but very little, in fact no one was writing about songwriting at that particular point I was doing my thesis. So there's a massive gap in the literature, but I wouldn't have known that unless I asked that first question. And then the second question is really a methodological question. How and why can I know something about this thing? In other words, what techniques can I put together in order to gain some knowledge about what's going on? And then the last question is the analytical one. It's really, what does this information that I've now gathered together, what does it mean? And it usually means something in relation to the very first question. So there are ideas and problems and so on that maybe haven't been solved, that it's your responsibility to solve. So you need to be analysing in terms of what we already know and then extending that as a result of your analysis. Yeah? So, the very first thing that you've got to do if you're interested in creativity is get past a whole series of cultural assumptions about it. In other words, the common sense ideas that you've got, you need to get those out of your head. And that's very hard if you belong to a particular culture where these things are transparent, they're so naturalised that we just think they're true. And one of the questions, in fact we were talking about this over lunch, one of the primary questions that all researchers are asking is this true? In my case, does songwriting work like this? Is it true that you stick your finger in the air, as Keith Richards was saying, and it's simply, that's an antenna and it comes into your head? Is that process true? It turns out it's not, but you've got to get past all of those particular ideas as you go. So, I would suggest that there are two fundamental assumptions from the European point of view. It's certainly not the case from South Asia or from China, where they think about creativity in these ways. In fact, the African situation might be entirely different as well. But these two, I think, fairly famous paintings will kind of demonstrate the two different ways of thinking about it that I would call simply cultural assumptions. And one of these is that we are inspired in some way or another from some external force, whether it's from God or the muse or whatever. So let's call that the inspirationist view. And this one's a classic romantic painting about the artist suffering, the genius, and it's bubbling up from their unconscious and so on. And those ideas are fairly solidly fixed, certainly in Western culture. So that you've got to get past that in order to get to the truth of whatever the matter is. And that's a very difficult thing to do. As you could see, I worked inside the rock music industry for quite a long time, and there was a very particular way of understanding creativity for rock musicians. And it is highly associated with those two ways of thinking. So across my research, I think all good researchers in some way need to do this, you follow the evidence, not what you would believe is to be the truth. You've just got to simply follow the evidence. And a part of my own process was turning my thinking in a complete 180-degree circle. So that I'm now think in almost the opposite way to what I used to think when I was a working musician. I think you've got to be open to that process. So, just in terms of some evidence out of the literature about those prior ideas, Margaret Bowden, she's a cognitive psychologist. She's working on artificial intelligence, so she's interested in the notion of creativity and problem solving and so on. And note the title of her, this book from 2004, The Creative Mind, Myths and Mechanisms. Once you start reading the literature on creativity, this word comes up in book titles quite a lot. And that's where the cultural assumptions live. You've got to get past the beliefs, you've got to get past the myths about creativity and so on. And this paragraph here I think is quite blunt, but I think it's a fairly good one. She says that the inspirational and romantic views, those two paintings that we looked at before, are believed by many to be literally true, but they're rarely critically examined. I want to stop there for a second. To examine something critically, once again, it's just you asking one question. The students are very used to this, by the way. One question: is this true? Is this statement true? Is this sentence true? This is something that I learned from my own doctoral supervisor. That you've got to start thinking in almost a legalistic way as a researcher. You can make a statement, and if someone can pull it apart, you've got to go back and rework the statement in some way or another. We've got 5 things in our favour when we're critical thinkers. We can either understand things through a process of intuition, and my work has kind of validated a little bit of that as well, so I'll come back to that a little bit later. But that tends to not be the case, that you would follow things intuitively. In other words, you don't engage with the truth affectively in an embodied way. I feel that this is true, so therefore it is. So that gets ruled out. The next one also gets ruled out, and that's a thing called tenacity, which is common sense. Things have been true for a very long time, so therefore they are true. The world is flat, and it has been the case for thousands of years, until we have some research evidence to say, I'm sorry, it's not flat, it's actually quite round. So common sense is problematic for researchers. The next one, you can't know everything, but you need to trust some people at some time, some authorities or whatever. The best authorities that you have are primarily out of journal articles, peer-reviewed, publicly verified knowledge. Someone might sound authoritative down in the local bar, and they might be very convincing, they might be very assertive. That doesn't make them authoritative. It's the evidence that they're producing. And the next two are, well, to me, quite obvious. Rationality, you can reason your way to the truth. And if I can't dispute the logic, I've got to accept what you're saying. So logic is really important to you. And the next one is empiricism. And empiricism is just based on extending our senses. Eyes, ears, taste, smell, and so on. These are our senses. And humans have got very good at extending our senses way out into the solar system, sending all sorts of apparatus out there, bringing something back that we can see, or we can hear, or any of those sort of. We go down to the bottom of the ocean trenches and do much the same sort of thing. So bringing evidence back from the cases that we're dealing with, that's really what that we've all got on our side as far as critically examining something.
So sorry, the fifth one, what did you call it?
Empiricism. E-M-P-I-R-I-C-I-S-M.
Okay.
So the empirical approach. So you just go out into the world and you observe, I'm saying that very widely, look, see, listen, etc., and bring the evidence back with you.
Empiriska på svenska.
So we might need a bit of translation as well. Okay, so then she goes on. She says, these things are not theories so much as myths. They're imaginative constructions whose function is to express the values, assuage the fears, and endorse the practices of the community that celebrates them. And what that points to for me is that as researchers, you've got to be able to identify what's a historically generated discourse, a conversation about something that sounds true, and what's universally transcendently true. So in other words, if you can identify things that only exist in this locale, they don't exist everywhere else, then maybe this thing is not true. If you can identify things that are true in this historical period, but not in all other historical periods, then maybe that's very specifically true for that time and that place. So it's a historically generated discourse, which I would suggest Romanticism and Inspirationism belongs in Europe at a very particular historical time. Now, if the ideas that you come up with, the evidence that you come up with, work across space, in other words, everywhere, and they work across time, then you can reliably say that you're now working with a universally transcendent truth. For instance, gravity would be one of those things. Yep. These ideas on Romanticism and Inspirationism are at the level of historically generated discourses. And you've got to be very careful of those things. Because, you might be making claims about a world, the entire world, when it's only applicable in this particular area. Okay, which gets us to this. European conceptions of creativity have changed over the centuries. And once you leave Europe, you'll find an even wider range of conceptions of creativity cross-cultural. I did a study with music directors from the Malayalam film industry in Kerala, in Western India. And their understanding of creativity was certainly most different to my culture's. In fact, much closer to this systems idea, and very similar situation in China as well. So these ideas here don't travel that well once you leave this continent. Okay, so the scientific explanation of creativity, which is what I'm interested in, has found that many of our beliefs about creativity are inaccurate or misleading. That's why I call them creativity myths. These creativity myths are so widely believed, they sometimes seem obvious or common sense. So you've got to be careful. Keith Sawyer, who's written a book called Explaining Creativity, The Science of Human Innovation, I think the title is just worth for that alone, says that he argues that a rational account of creativity requires us to look critically at our own cultural assumptions about how creativity works, and scientific studies of creativity fail to support our most cherished beliefs about creativity. So there's a lot of caution that I'm kind of saying to you here at the front end that you need to be aware of. Okay, so if we're going to figure out what this thing is, well, we've got to ask that first question. What do we already know? And that entails a lot of reading. So that's just one shot. If you want to get into this in any significant way, there are two books that I would recommend. And that's these two here. One I just mentioned is Keith Sawyer's Explaining Creativity, The Science of Human Innovation. This is the second edition, which came out in 2011, so it's relatively recent. But he's summarising most of the studies in psychology across a wide area in that book. This one by Victoria Alexander, called Sociology of the Arts. I think it's called Studying Fine and Popular Forms or something like that as the subhead. That certainly gives you the sociological view. So psychology and sociology are probably the two disciplines that have dealt with this more than any others. Not that there aren't other disciplines that do, they most certainly those two. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of material there. And that's just one of my shelves. I have a number of shelves. So, you can read my work as well. This book came out in 2012. It kind of sets out the theoretical ideas that I've gathered together, and that's primarily what I'm going to talk about today. This book sets out the empirical studies to support those theoretical ideas. So here's evidence to suggest that these ideas are true. So you can read these in tandem. I've got another one coming out in March. No, going to publish in March of next year. There are also quite a lot of journals that you can access for that authoritative information. This one's probably the preeminent one, although just lately they're just only accepting quantitative case studies, which I think is only giving us only a third of the picture, really. So I published in these. This is the International Journal of Creativity and Problem Solving. It's really interesting. Once you kind of look at a topic, in this case let's just say topic is creativity, and you open up the door to the literature, suddenly you discover that there's a hell of a lot of information already out there. And you could take the notion just for one word. You could take music and you go to the library and the door opens and there's a hell of a lot of information. And you, as researchers, need to become very familiar with it. So that you don't reinvent the world, that you identify where the lack of knowledge is and all those sorts of things. So if I was any of your supervisors, that's the first thing you would be doing, is just reading a lot. And I think that's critically important. So, drawing a number of those authoritative research sources, we can see that creative activity has been broadly defined as the bringing into being of novel things that are valued in at least one social setting. And I can reduce that down. I've got a longer definition of that, but I'll reduce it down just to 2 words. You need to have novelty and you need to have value. Those two things are critical in order for us to identify something as creative. It has to be novel, it has to be valuable. Now, what does that actually mean? What are the implications of those 2 words? How do you identify novelty? How do you know whether something is novel? Well, of course, you know whether something is novel because you have a body of knowledge that you judge it against. So tradition is important as well as innovation. How do you know whether something is valuable or not? In other words, I could put all sorts of objects together. I could put, here's an artwork for you. I've already put a whole series of objects together. But how do I identify this as, well, it's just fairly mundane? Or is it, in fact, creative? Is it valuable to me? Is it appropriate for what we're doing? Once again, the only way I can make that judgment is against a body of knowledge. So I need to be absorbed in that body of knowledge. How do I know whether a musical phrase that I've come up with is any, in inverted commas, good? How do I know whether it's an original idea or not? Now, I can come up with a musical phrase and I can make that into a corridor and I can start singing da 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 da. Suddenly someone says, that's Satisfaction from the Rolling Stones. So a judgment has to be made. So novelty and value both rely on judgment of some sort. So so that's the first thing that we need to learn, is that you need to absorb yourself into something so well that you can make those judgments. And there's enough evidence to kind of support that as well. So, when you read as much of this literature as you possibly can, it tells you its own story in a way. Most of the initial research into creativity was very focused at individuals, because the natural assumption, of course, is that we do this. That's inside our brain. That's where all the ideas come from. That's just how the mechanism works. And that's a fairly natural assumption to make. By the same token, it might be different this time of year in Sweden, but the sun, where's the east? Where's the direction? Anyone know?
That way maybe.
Is that where the sun comes up?
Yeah, like that's no. This
That's
is kind of south. That's north. So east.
East is over there,
That way, yeah.
and the sun goes down over there.
Sun goes down there. Yeah,
Okay.
more or less.
Okay, so if you're standing, say, in summertime and you're watching the sun, it seems quite intuitive that the sun comes up, it goes around, and then it goes down, and then following, it comes back up again. So, of course, the Earth is the centre of the universe. It's quite obvious. You can see it. You can see it. Everything goes around us, doesn't it? Of course it doesn't. Until we present evidence to say, hang on a second, it's only like that. So Galileo and Copernicus comes along, etc., and they supply these mathematical equations and observations and so on to say, well, no, actually what's happening there is that the sun, that we're actually spinning around the sun, and it's actually quite still. So let's just say we've got two conceptions of the way that the solar systems work. One is Ptolemaic. Anyone here a Gemini? Anyone
Thinking of Gemini.
an Aries?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're still living in the land of the Ptolemaic universe when we start talking like that, because it comes directly from that Egyptian astrologer. So that's true at that particular time. So let's shift the solar system and go, the Earth is not so much in the centre anymore. We're still on the Earth doing the things that we have always done, but we're just off to the centre a little bit. And we actually revolve around other things. Can you understand the metaphor that I'm trying to get through to you here? So we start off thinking about creativity with us in the centre. And then we shift our thinking and we're no longer in the centre. We're just part of something. And in fact, in this journey through the literature, we move so far away from the idea that humans are centred in creativity that it's all social, it's all cultural. This fellow here, Karl Marx, says all art is a social product. It's not a product of what you do as individuals, it's the product of the society that you exist in, the culture that you exist in. So we've got a journey from this, reducing everything to individuals and psyche, to then right on the opposite end, the antithesis, reducing everything to society and culture. Now, the next part of the journey is the synthesis of those two things. From individual-based, social and cultural, to let's put them all together. Yeah? So there is a story that goes through all of that research literature. Here's a review of it. This is it's about 7 years old now. Came out, every so often psychology kind of reviews itself. It says, what's our topic for this year? So there's a thing called the Annual Review of Psychology. In 2010 it happened to be creativity. So these two, Beth Hennessy and Teresa Amabile from Harvard University, did what's called a meta-analysis of all the research that has been going on in creativity. There were neuroscientists working on it, of course focused here. There were people like Margaret Bowden, a cognitive psychologist, thinking about thinking processes and how that affects it. Personalities, of course, some people are creative and some people aren't. How do we explain that? Is it their personality? What is it? Some people working on how groups are creative. And it certainly becomes much bigger and bigger and bigger, etc. The problem is, as this article tells you, these people weren't talking to these people, and not talking to these people, or talking to these people, and so on. All working merrily away in their own little disciplines, but not trading information with each other. But once we start to trade that information, it looks more and more and more like that. But in fact, you need to understand all of these things in order to understand what is happening with creativity. And I'll explain that in more depth in a second. So, what was their conclusion? They say that research into creativity has grown theoretically and methodologically sophisticated. That's that journey that I was talking about a little earlier. But investigators in one subfield often seem unaware of advances in another. So deeper understanding requires more interdisciplinary research based on a systems view of creativity that recognises a variety of interrelated forces operating at multiple levels. So I read this and I contacted Teresa and I emailed her and said, I love it, fantastic, that's really brilliant. It's lucky that we already have one of these systems approaches. It came out in 1988 and I sent her the article and heard nothing more from her at all. Because I think she was pushing her own understanding of a system. So here's that systems model. So, anyone know how to say his name?
Csikszentmihalyi.
Pretty close. Write this down, I'm going to give it to you phonetically. C-H-I-C-K, that's Chick. There you go. Cent, S-E-N-T, Chick, Cent. And then the third syllable is me, M-E. And the fourth is H-I-G-H, which is high. String them all together and you've got Chick Sent Me High. And his first name is here. So his name is Me High, Chick Sent Me High. Which if you translate from the Hungarian is Michael, son of Saint Michael. And if you let your eyes go out of focus, you can actually see it there. Son of Saint Michael. Sort of.
Yeah.
So Chick Sent Me High. And he's a lovely fella. So, what does he say? Really early on, he says, what we call creative is never the result of individual action alone. It's the product of three main shaping forces. Without going too far into it, you need a field. I'm going to go in depth into these terms in a second, so we've got some idea of what he's talking about. That selects from the variations produced by the individual. So you do something with the tradition, the convention, the knowledge or whatever, cut it up, you rearrange it, match up or whatever, and that produces the novelty. There's a stable cultural domain that will preserve and transmit the selected new ideas or forms to the following generation. And finally, the individual, who brings about some change in the domain. So you want to think about this, there's yourself, think of a whole pile of books as a metaphor for a body of knowledge, and think of all the people who have that knowledge in their head. That's the field. So there's a social organisation that understands the knowledge system that you are part of. And without all those three things being at play, creativity simply doesn't happen. So if I said to you, where does fire come from? You don't have to ask that question. We're not dealing with physics here, etc. Most of you would say it comes from the spark. Without the action of the spark occurring, you can't have fire. And you probably wouldn't even think that you need tinder and that you need oxygen. So there are three things that you need in order for fire to happen. A spark, you need oxygen, and you need tinder. You take one of those things away, no fire. No oxygen in the environment. Doesn't matter how much tinder you've got, how much that spark is attempting to spark, it simply won't happen. So all those things are necessary, but not sufficient by themselves to produce fire. Do you understand the metaphor? Okay, same situation here. Okay, you are important. Take you out of the equation, nothing happens. But by the same token, if you don't have a body of knowledge that you can work with, nothing happens. If you can't make judgments, and remember that you are part of this as well, you can't make judgments about the novelty that you've brought into being, nothing happens. So novelty and value are critically important. For those three things, you, as a choice-making entity, a group of people, including yourself, that can make decisions about what it is that you've done. Is it just bizarre, or is it in fact creative? And a body of knowledge that you are continually referring back and forward to. In other words, a set of antecedent conditions of some sort. So, what does he say? For creativity to occur, a set of rules and practices must be transmitted from the domain to the individual. The individual must then produce a novel variation in the content of the domain. The variation then must be selected by the field for inclusion in the domain. That seems to be all quite linear, actually, and I don't think it is linear at all. Certainly if it's not a systems approach. So the relationship between these three necessary but not sufficient subsystems are non-linear. That is, they are characterised by dynamic links of circular causality. In other words, each of the three main systems, person, field and domain, affects the others and is affected by them in turn. And the starting point in this map is purely arbitrary. You might think, well, I have an idea and then I take it to the field or whatever the case may be. But oftentimes it's the knowledge system that drives the process along, or it's the field that drives the process along, not you. Physics, let's go back to physics again for a second. You might have learnt in high school for the table of elements. Yeah? And we discover that there is, in fact, a table of elements there, and this element fits here and this one fits. And look, there's a whole gap there at a certain point in time. And at some point, that knowledge system, that domain, demands us to fill in the gaps. So a whole group of scientists get together, they get creative, and suddenly they discover this element. So the knowledge system can drive it. In my area, in terms of rock or pop music, etc., there is a demand for new material all the time, something to fill the charts with, something to keep the system moving along, keep the industry working, etc. We need new songs. So the field is driving this process, not me as a songwriter. I need to have all those things in play in order for this to work. Okay, this is one way to map it out. Let me just talk to you briefly about maps for a second. I'm sure that there's in the, you call it the metro here? The train system?
Yeah.
The train system. I haven't been down, but I imagine there are maps on the wall with maybe red lines and blue lines and all that sort of stuff. Very common around the world these days. And you can use that map to make your way around through the metro system, yes?
Yeah.
But you don't actually believe that those red lines and blue lines and the squiggles and so on, etc., that is the railway system, is it? It's just a representation of the railway system. Yeah? Or put it another way, it's a theory of the metro. And the theory is good enough for you to be able to move through the world, yes? That's all this is. It's just a map of how creativity happens. It's not literally creativity happening. Don't confuse the representation with the reality. So this is a way to be analytical in this process. So all this is saying to us is there's a choice-making agent, an entity. It could be an individual, it could be a group, it could be an institution that's making choices and rearranging things into something novel. Yes? It has a very idiosyncratic background. Some of you have got longer fingers than others, some of you got shorter fingers than others. That biological attribute has something to do with what you produce. Yep. You might be the first in your family, you might be the third. Where you're born has something to do with what you're contributing. The social class that you come from, the gender that you are, and so on. All has something to do with what you bring to this situation. Yeah? So you have something that nobody else has. Or to put this another way, you've got a unique background, but it's also shared with a whole pile of other people. You're firstborn, a whole pile of firstborns out there. You belong to the working class, well, that tells you something. That's a shared entity, a set of characteristics. But you are not peculiar, but you're unique within that shared series of characteristics. So you bring something interesting to this process. There's a knowledge system. Tons of these domains make up a particular culture. So we've got music, we might have film, we might have radio, we might have television, all of which are domains of knowledge in one way or another. Put them all together and we've got a culture. Yeah? We have a number of subcultural groups. We have a number of cultural groups inside that make one particular society, I should say social groups inside one particular society. The way that we form hierarchies, the way that we get decisions made and all that sort of stuff is all built into this process. Put them all together and out of their interaction, this thing happens. I, of course, argue it's not just practices or processes or products, it's creativity itself. It comes about as a result of that interaction. So, I'm going to go deeper, we're going to go deeper into all of this. Okay, so just to reiterate again, the domain, you can really identify all of the created products that have been accepted by the field in the past. That's going to be important to remember. You immerse yourself in it. It's really hard to write a song without even knowing what a song is. It's really hard to write a good song unless you've got a very good knowledge of what songs are and that you can recall things. A moment ago I said there was the rift to satisfaction. What if I've never heard this before? Where did that come from? And so on. So the knowledge system is really important to you. You, what's that made up of? You intimated that before. Nature, nurture, and access. Yes? Out of your biology, out of the environment that you have come from, and how much access you have to whatever the knowledge system may be. So if I'm talking about contemporary Western popular music songs, and I'm not from this area, or I have never heard any of them, very difficult for me to make one. So I need to input that information in order for it to come back out. So there's practical applications of this. Social organisation, it's a hierarchy of groups and individuals who deal with and can influence the knowledge system, this thing. A specific cultural domain on a regular basis. The field is thus a complex network of experts with varying expertise, status and power. Who are they? Talking about songs, etc. Well, of course, there are songwriters, there are musicians, there are record producers, there are engineers, there are technicians, and right on through to critics and audiences, all constituting part of this field. Now, part of my work has been to marry Csikszentmihalyi with Pierre Bourdieu. Have you come across Bourdieu's work at all? Have you ever used the term social capital? Cultural capital?
Yeah.
Human capital? Well, you know this work. All these ideas come from this person here. So quite a number of things that he's dealing with, but watch this. Just watch this. He's got slightly different terms. That one's the same. And I think he's primarily describing exactly the same thing as Csikszentmihalyi. He's just using a slightly different focus. He's coming from a Marxist phenomenological tradition, and Csikszentmihalyi is coming from a fairly functional Darwinist tradition. So different take on what I would suggest is the same object. So look at this. Field of works. Well, it could be space of works. It depends how you translate the French, but let's just call it field of works for now. It's the accumulated cultural work completed up to this time in a particular field. And it includes techniques and codes of production. And it presents itself to each, this is an important thing, it's the heritage accumulated by collective work, everything that's ever been made in your particular area, which presents itself to each agent, a choice-making entity, as a space of possibles. What is it possible to do? So I can take, these songs have been written in this particular way, and I might take various number of them and put them together in a unique way and just push this work. So I'm working in the realm of what's possible. Not what is impossible, what is possible. And that's an important word for him. So this becomes important. There's an ensemble of probable constraints, which are the condition and the counterpart of a set of possible uses. So that body of knowledge does two things. It puts a constraint around what you're likely to do, and it also enables what you're likely to do. So it does two things at exactly the same time. It stops and it enables. It constrains and it enables. And I wish there was a word to put those two things together. In fact, I think I have one. I don't know, my PhD students does. Harry Kritikos, he's responsible for the word constrainably. Which is a lovely word, but nonetheless. So I think this is very close to what Csikszentmihalyi was talking about with the domain. It's a body of knowledge that exists somewhere that you need to access. This concept here, you may have come across it, habitus. We all have one. It's things that we are not quite habituated to, but it's very close. Or to put it another way, you have a feel for how things work. How many of you how many of you songwriters, by the way? Okay, very good. Nearly all of you. Yeah. Have you been in a situation where you've come up with a song and you just know that this works, this is right? Yeah? I'm sure you all have. You just had a feel that this thing was okay, which comes back to the question of tuition, because I think that's all it is. You've gone, or you might be editing a music video, and you put this piece of vision together with this piece of vision, and you move it there, 2 or 3 seconds over there, not quite right. Bring it back this way, perfect. Leave it, don't touch it. Yeah? Where does that come from? And I think this actually explains where that comes from. That you know this stuff so well that you can make tacit decisions about what it is that you're actually doing. Or to explain it another way, it's a practical sense that inclines agents to act and react in specific situations in a manner that's not always calculated, and it's not simply a question of conscious obedience to rules. I'm going to come back to that in a second when I deal with agents and structure. It's a set of dispositions, so you're not determined in your actions. You don't have to do this, but you're likely to do it. You absorb into this body of knowledge, you're likely to make certain sorts of decisions. Absorb yourself into this body of knowledge, and you're likely to make certain sorts of decisions based on those bodies of knowledge. Yeah? So you're disposed to do it. For instance, this room here, there's a door there, there's a door there. The shape of this room, the roof, the floor, the walls, etc., it's likely that I'm going to leave this room by that door or by that door. It's not likely that I'm going to walk straight into that wall and try to leave the room through the wall. You follow what I'm saying? So I'm predisposed. My actions, I still make choices. I'm not determined in my actions, but I am predisposed to act in a certain way. So room, of course, is a metaphor for the body of knowledge. Okay, so it's a set of dispositions which generates practices and perceptions. It's a result of a long process of inculcation, beginning in early childhood, which becomes second sense or second nature. You just know, because you've been absorbed in this thing for quite a while. You know what feels good, what's wrong, what's not, etc. Yeah? How many of you are players, by the way? How many more of you?
Playing instruments?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And you improvise at certain points?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is you in action.
Yeah.
Right here. You're making decisions as you go along, and can I just share something personal with you for a second? Someone over the weekend was asking me, do you want to come and have a beer? And I said, no, I'm just so used to not having a beer. That came out of a very specific event. As a musician, I remember walking out of the dressing room, and we were working quite a lot, and having had imbibed for quite a while, walking out onto the stage, and as soon as I hit the room, I knew I'm not going to cope with any of this. My brain had gone, and I was very, very wobbly. But I knew in the middle of this set was a fairly complex solo. And I remember quite literally the point at which I thought, no, I'm at work, I'm not drinking while I'm at work. I call it playing, but I'm actually at work, so I've just stopped drinking as a result of that. I still drink at Christmas time, so I'll probably have one a little bit later. But I can remember, I can still see it in front of me, my fingers playing this solo, and I literally said to my fingers, I said, fingers, you are on your own, I cannot help you now. And I watched my hand play through this solo spectacularly well. I had no conscious control over what was going on. But because of this, in other words, practiced over and over and over again, so it becomes intuitive to you, it becomes automatic, it does all those sorts of things. But the decisions, what you're predisposed to do, are taken care of for you, luckily. As an instrumentalist, let me ask you another question. Who drives the car? I figured that would be most of you. Do you take long trips? Sometimes, yeah. Okay, so have you ever had the experience of on a long trip that you've been driving and then looked around and suddenly you were there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it happens on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the question is, who was driving the car at that point?
That's a good question.
That's right. It's a normal down. Okay, so you can check this back home here as well. That you've become so inculcated into those processes that you are likely to do certain things. They're not even at the conscious level, it's just happening. So you have a feel for what's right, you have a practical sense of how it works and so on. Yeah? So it's applicable in all sorts of places. The field, and I think this is where Borgia differs from Csikszentmihalyi, he really concentrates on the contest, the struggle that goes on for dominance inside that field, which is betrays his Marxist roots. It's an arena of social contestation. This is where decisions get made. Some decisions get made in favour of other people, and so on. Yeah? So it's a social contest. It's a dynamic space, it's active, things are happening all the time, which denote arenas of production, circulation and appropriation of goods, services, knowledge or status, that's important, and the competitive positions held by actors, people who make decisions, in their struggle to accumulate and monopolise different kinds of capital. So the field in some ways is dependent on various forms of capital. So here's a couple of them. A cultural product such as a song has meaning and interest only for someone who possesses the cultural competence, that is the code into which it is encoded. I could try as much as I possibly could to speak Swedish to you, and you wouldn't understand a word I was saying because the code that I'm using would be nonsense to you. But you could speak to each other, couldn't you? And you would understand and communicate quite readily. It's lucky that we share English, because I wouldn't be able to get this information out of my head into your head without that code. Yes? And that's primarily what a culture is about. We have a shared set of codes that we can transfer information and communicate with each other. Now, what does that mean as far as we're concerned? Well, money is important. So we can contest each other with money in terms of status and so on. And if you've got money, you can do things. Are you doing any major projects? I imagine you are master students.
Yeah.
Yeah? So you've probably got limited funds available to you, being students, yes?
Not really.
Actually, it's unlimited.
Yeah.
In which way? Tell me about that.
Gail can tell you.
If you have a good idea, I think you can get some money.
Okay. But it wouldn't be limitless amount of money, would it?
Not
Obviously not, but
not
it's
So there's a certain amount of money that you can do certain things with.
Yeah.
Yes? It wouldn't be, say for instance, $1 million, would it?
Probably not.
But you can imagine in your head what you could do if you did have $1 million. You could do all sorts of spectacular things, couldn't you? And that would be different to if you had, say, 100 krona. Yeah. Very different, wouldn't it? So economic capital is quite important to the things that you're producing. Yes? And we struggle over that. Struggle for status, dominance, etc. Cultural capital, which is, in Bourdieu's terms, convertible on certain conditions into economic capital, may be institutionalised in the form of educational qualifications. Why are you here? Do you want a bit of paper at the end? Do you want to demonstrate to someone where you're going to go and teach that I am qualified to teach this? Do you want to translate that graduation certificate or whatever, in your case it's a degree, isn't it, into that? In other words, do you want someone to pay you to do what it is you've trained to do? And what you're being trained to do is understand what that code is. And that code may be musical in your case, or if you study medicine, it might be biology or whatever. Yeah? So cultural capital is critically important. That's also related to social capital. It's made up of social obligations or connections. Are you building networks now? Everybody nod and say yes. It's likely that you're going to be working with these people at some point in your life. And you need to be able to get on, you need to know what their phone number is, you need to be able to ring them, and so on, etc. Yes. So networks are incredibly important, so therefore social capital is. And symbolic capital, it's the degree of accumulated prestige, celebrity, or honour, and is founded on a dialectic of knowledge and recognition. In other words, if I've got this on my wall in my office, and you happen to know that I'm part of this band, etc., that, the holder of that, has some position of power, some position that can be traded on, and so on. And you build a reputation. And what I say to my students all the time is the only thing that you trade on in your career is your reputation. And you need to guard that as strongly as you possibly can. Because it's a form of capital as well. So all of these things, economic capital, cultural capital, social capital, and symbolic capital are critically important to the way that you actually make things, that you continue to make things. So Bourdieu would roll over in his grave if he saw this turn to this quantified thing right here. But I think it's an able way to demonstrate it. Here's the blue person, here, and this green person would be almost the opposite. Lots of money, lots of social skills, not so much symbolic capital, has a very little understanding of, in our case, music. You can identify this person. Stereotypically, you can say, here's a record company and another person. That's a possibility. Maybe this person over here, I don't know if it's blue or purple, whatever it is, maybe he's a starting artist. Yes? They know their material really, really well. They don't have very much money. They haven't been terribly successful. Oh no, they have been successful. Look, symbolised in all sorts of ways. Yes? Well, they know lots of people, but not as many people as this green person. Yep. So that sets up how this particular field, in this case it's talking around music, because it's quite obvious one, that sets up a series of relationships in here, and you're continually negotiating between that person and that person in order to get things done. Or, to make it even simpler, let's call them someone, Sue, Pam, Harry, yes? And instead of saying cultural capital or symbolic capital or economic capital, let's just simply say skills, experience, contacts and cash. These are all critically important to you. This one is what you're gaining primarily from your education. You're also gaining experience. As I said before, you're probably going to work with each other. You're gaining this as well, but maybe not so much of this in the situation that you're in. And you're hoping to change those sets of circumstances along the way. But without these all being in play, and this to some extent, it's unlikely that you'll continue to be a part of the musical field. Yes.
Yeah, just a question. How do you translate symbolic capital to experience?
Okay.
Or is it the same order on this picture? Yes.
It is the same order. Yes.
Yeah. So please explain that. How you translate those.
That's okay. The symbolic capital doesn't always come in formal ways.
Yeah.
Yes, it can also come in informal ways. People can talk to each other about your work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they can symbolise it to each other.
Yeah.
He's a good guy. He can do this. Look, he's worked with X band over here, and if that X band is really famous, yep, that symbolises something about you.
So your kind of perceived experience by other people.
Yes.
That's what determines your symbolic kind of capital.
Yeah. So the field is making decisions about you based on the levels of these things that you possess.
Yeah.
Yep.
Makes sense. Yeah. Thanks.
So these things are critically important. It's not just this. The field is just, in other words, the social organisation is just as important to your work as this one is.
Mm.
And so is this, as you're going to discover as you move into the professional area. And of course the money, much as we don't like. In fact, here's some examples for you. This is, I don't know if you recognise any of these people. You might not recognise Dave Bartholomew, but you might recognise Fats Domino.
Yes.
Yes? Let's just say when you listen to Fats Domino's work, his ability to swing, the straight time against the swan triplets, etc. Okay, he can do that really well. This is his record producer. They're working in New Orleans. This is Cosmo Natassa's studio. Imagine Dave Bartholomew trying to get this very successful Fats Domino to play in a particular way. What if Dave Bartholomew did not understand swing time at all? Would he be able to convince Fats Domino by how to play a particular way on these records? These records that he's had hits with, does that give him some sort of power relationship with Dave Bartholomew over here? Yeah? Follow what I'm saying? Yep. All of those things are in operation right there in the middle of that photo. There's the knowledge system sitting right here. And what are they doing? They're conversing about it. How do they converse about it? They're transferring coded information, in this case it's notation, between each other. There's a great deal. So all these things, as far as I'm concerned, are literally right here in this photo. Does anyone know who this is?
King Tobit now?
Close.
Okay.
It's actually Lee Scratch Perry,
Okay.
who's worked with Bob Marley and so on, yes? And this is Black Ark Studios. This is before he went right off the edge. And he's got right off the edge quite a fair distance, yes? Now, is anyone here into reggae? That's good because I hope I don't get this wrong. Do you know what a one-drop beat is?
What's that?
Sorry?
What's that?
Let me explain what a one-drop beat is to you. It doesn't actually come from Lee Scratch Perry, but he's worked with Bob Marley, and it's this guy here. Do you know who that is? Okay, let me tell you, it's Carlton Barrett. That's the drummer in Bob Marley's band, certainly in any significant area, yes? At that time period that he was actually working. And every so often, in the reggae form, you've got the bass guitar doing its short phrase, gaps, whatever. And then you've got the drummer playing, instead of the snare on the 2 and the 4, you've got the kick drum on the 2 and the 4 and the snare on the 1 and the 3. Yeah? Completely turned around. And around about the 4th bar, don't hit the kick drum. Don't let the bass play on that 4th beat of the 4th bar. Sorry, the 3rd beat of the 4th bar. Yes? Suddenly you've got this massive hole right there. And what do your dancers do? What do your listeners do? They swing, this is your idea of audiences, they swing straight away and they pay a direct attention to you. Why? Because they set up a pattern, this rhythm's happening there, and then suddenly it's gone. And then that it jumps in again. Yeah? So you just drop that beat. This is one drop, that's what it's called, yes? So what have I just demonstrated to you? A high level of cultural capital. I know who these people are. There's some symbolic capital at work. There's some social capital at work. What if I said to you, this is my mate, I'm going to give him a phone call, I need a reggae tune to be played, I'm going to ring Carlton up, and he'll be in here in 2 days' time, in this session, in our recording studio. And if you're a reggae artist, you go, wow, that's fantastic, let's bring him in, play on our tune or whatever. Social capital, cultural capital, symbolic capital, all of which is convertible into cash, economic capital in one way or another. Yeah? So you continue then working with those processes. Okay, so I'm going to go over it again in just a little bit more depth, so we keep going deeper and deeper here. Okay, I've actually said here, field of work, space of works, domain, I think they're all the same thing. Here's an image to hold in your head. Look at all those records. Yep. Think of all the records that have ever been made. At one point, what you're going to have to do is absorb yourself at least into some of these in order to make some of these things. Yes? So, what is he actually saying? He says the possibility of action, doing stuff, occurs within or is produced in a field of works, or more correctly translated in a space of works. It is the accumulated cultural work done to this time in a particular field, and that presents itself to you as a space for what's possible. And then you enter into that space, and then you're making decisions inside that space, in that body of knowledge. He says that there's a relationship between two structures. The field, all of the people who hold this knowledge in their head in one degree or another, but it's not, everybody doesn't have the same amount of knowledge. It's variable, hence the notions of cultural capital and so on. So there's a relationship between that. The space of works, one must understand if one is to know and understand how culture is produced, or put another way, if one is to understand how creativity happens. This includes the structure of objective relations between positions in the field, how people relate to each other, basically, and among the producers who occupy them, and the structure of objective relations among the position takings in the space of works. Don't worry about trying to unpack that. He's French, so you can talk like that. Let it go. So you've got to think of two words, predisposition and possibility. You're predisposed to make certain decisions, and the possibility of those decisions is presented to you here in the work that you engage with. I dare say most of you would not be producing reggae tunes. So you just said you're not into reggae, yes? In order to produce a lot of reggae stuff, then you would probably have to absorb yourself into those particular acts of whatever's going on. Yeah? That's primarily what he's saying. The field. When we make records, it's not just me again. Think of that solar system analogy. There's lots of people, all having their input in one way or another. Here we've got, doesn't matter who they are. The live situation has got something to do with the recorded situation. These people, it's quite obviously they're making decisions and discussing what they're actually hearing here. So there's a struggle for dominance taking place. Or in other words, if you want to put it another way, there are discussions and conversations happening about what we should keep and what we should not keep. So they denote, and that's repeated again, it's the social organisation, the hierarchy of groups and individuals who deal with and can influence the knowledge system of a specific cultural domain on a regular basis. And Sawyer says much the same thing as Bourdieu. It's a complex network of experts with varying expertise, status and power. Yeah, I'm going to come to power in a second and how I think that works. Okay, I've talked about habitus before. I've talked about that process as well. This is Keith Jarrett. Do you know Keith Jarrett's work? Piano player? And so he's improvising all the time, and then we transcribe that. My sister is amazing. She's been playing piano since she was 4. She could read music notation before she could read English. And she found a transcription of the Cologne concert, and she just sat down and played it, and it sounded just like Jarrett playing. Amazing stuff she does. But if she hadn't been at that for such a long time, in other words, understanding the notation, how to translate that, so on, etc., she simply couldn't have done it. So this concept is pretty important to you as a creative individual, yes, as an agent who makes choices. Which gets to this. Now we're going to go underneath and have a look at some of the philosophical underpinnings of this, yes? Okay. Now, you make choices, but you can only make those choices because you're absorbed into the structures around you. In fact, some people would argue that those structures are the direct result of all the choices that everybody else has made. That's what culture is, a direct result of all the choices we've made over the years and so on. So there's a direct relationship between agency and structure. Or let's put this another way. We tend to think of this as your choice-making abilities, your free will. We tend to think of this as the things that determine our actions. Whether it's your biology, whether it's the class that you belong to, or whatever. We make choices because of those things. And we tend to put them in opposition. Whereas I think people like Bourdieu and Anthony Giddens and Janet Wolfe and so on, quite a few others are saying, no, they're actually in direct relationship to each other. You can't have black without white. In fact, with that whole process of getting rid of the oppositions, this is what I was talking about yesterday at the conference, the question of what's called complementarity. Okay, so let's just pursue that for a little bit. Everything a cultural producer does is located inside and thus affected by the structures they deal with, in our case social and cultural structures. It does not follow from this that in order to be free agents, we somehow have to liberate ourselves from social structures and act outside them. In fact, I think that's quite an impossibility. On the contrary, the existence of these structures and institutions enables any activity on our part, and this applies equally to acts of conformity and acts of rebellion. That's a big claim. Yeah. She said, all action, she says, all action, including creative or innovative action, arises in the complex conjunction of numerous determinants and conditions. Any concept of creativity which denies this is metaphysical, and you simply can't sustain it at any logical level. So you need to be involved in those structures, in our case the social structures and the cultural structures. And Bourdieu gets a little more harsh. He says, theories that invoke social mechanisms and determinisms in order to explain our apparently most personal and free actions are often understood as being equivalent to a pure and simple negation of the realities that we call freedom and the personality. And he goes in further. He says, those who think in simple alternatives, free will on one side, determinism on the other, need to be reminded that in these matters, absolute freedom, exalted by the defenders of creative spontaneity, belongs only to the naive and the ignorant. That's a pretty harsh statement. And during my doctorate, I had to be thinking about these things quite a lot. You know, can I just tell you a story of a particular moment that struck me? Yes? And I might get you involved in this as well. I was teaching material like this. I was also playing in the band. I also surfed quite a lot. And at one point I owned a farm and a banana plantation, which I bought out of stuff like that in the music industry. 4,000 trees. So I'm really interested in the weather. I'm really interested in what the planet is doing. I'm interested in all those things. I'm also interested in trying to resolve this question of what constitutes free will. This is what you get a doctor of philosophy for. What constitutes that thing? Because if I can't understand free will, I cannot understand creativity, because it's about making choices. Am I free to make those choices? So I'm thinking about this, one day at the end of class, I'm thinking about it for months on end. I need to resolve this particular problem. And I'm walking back to my car. I was going to say in the playground, it's not, it was at the university campus. I'm walking back to my car. As I said, I showed you the picture, I live quite by the ocean. I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive home. So I think, I just put a few hypotheticals in place. I said, what if I walk? What if I walk home? And so I'm going to go east. So I walk and I walk and I walk. I'll go past home and I'll just keep going to the beach and I'll just keep walking. At some point, unless I put some scuba gear on, I'm stopped by the water. I simply can't breathe. But I put some scuba gear on, I go, but what the capacity of the tank is my limit, yes? So then hypothetically I say to myself, okay, let's go the opposite direction. So it's really always interesting to do. So I go in the opposite direction. I've just got to walk a lot longer until I get to the Indian Ocean. And I'm faced with the same limits, or the same constraints as it were. So I go, okay, let's be good researchers, let's try out all the scenarios. I'm going to go south. So I walk and I walk and I walk and I walk, and I bump into the same thing, the Great Southern Ocean. So I come back to the starting point. Let me go north. So I go north and I bump into the Arafura Sea up there. I'm faced by these limits all around me. I'm living on an island. Yes? Okay, so I think, well, let's test this right to its limits. North, south, east, west. What about up? So I'll jump as high as I possibly can, and I can go a certain direction, but I'm held by gravity. Yes? Now I put a rocket on my back and I can keep going, but at some point I'm going to run out of the things that sustain my life. So if I've only got one option left, I'm going to go down. I'm free to go down. No, it's very hard, it's very solid. I get myself a spade and I can keep digging and drilling. At some point I run into magma and I fry, or whatever. So all around me are these, let's call them geological structures that are also bounded by my biology. I can't go so far into space that my biology goes, you will survive. I can't. Now, so bear all of that in mind. The other thing is, I think I live in a liberal democracy. Note the term liberal. Question of freedom associated with that. Note the term democracy, freedom associated with that. Can I do absolutely anything that I want to do inside a liberal democracy? Well, one would ideologically hope that we could, but nonetheless there are rules. Yeah, I can't walk up to the person coming in the door and punch them in the face without having my liberty constrained by being thrown in jail and so on. So I'm thinking about all of this, and then it strikes me. I actually live on a rock that's floating around in space, and there's this real thin sliver of atmosphere that I'm existing in, and I can't live everywhere on this rock that's floating around in space. But guess what? If it wasn't for those things, if it wasn't for that atmosphere, if it wasn't for the continent, I would drown, and so on. If it wasn't for gravity, I couldn't walk, I couldn't do all those things. So all those constraining factors, all those massive structures that I'm absolutely absorbed in fact enable my existence. Thank God for them. Because without them, I wouldn't be alive. Do you follow what I'm saying? Okay. So at that point, I resolve the problem of free will for myself. Free will is not the absence of constraint, because I'm constrained everywhere. Yes? It's actually something far more subtle than that. Do I have the ability to make a choice? If I have the ability to make a choice, I'm free. You can go back to Sartre and think through those things and so on, etc. So after I come to that resolution, I'm happy with all of this research into creativity, because I need to understand the structures, I need to understand all the social organisation, I need to understand the knowledge systems and so on, in order for me to be enabled to be creative. And without them, I can't take action. So that's really important. It doesn't mean I can do anything and everything. So let's put it in practical terms. A producer's, engineers, musicians, or an A&R person's ability to make decisions, whether they're organisational ones, whether they're financial ones, whether they're technical ones, or they're musical choices, that's always circumscribed by their studio competence, knowing how to do stuff, which is itself dependent on their immersion in and understanding of the domain of record production. It's very hard to make records if you don't understand how to produce records. Their power to get others to make decisions in their favour is also both constrained and enabled by their connections to the field, the social hierarchy that holds the domain as a central part of its operation. I'm ringing Carlton Barrett up, he's coming in to do a session for me. Yep. But what if I don't know Carlton Barrett? How do I get the one drop beat? How does that happen? So, that is to say that producers, engineers, musicians, or A&R person's agency, the ability to make and affect decisions, so we're free, is dependent on the structures, principally the domain and field they encounter and surround themselves with. As such, their freedom to act is relative to the domain and field they work in. You follow what I'm saying? Okay, so that means, for me, power is an incredibly important thing in the studio. What it is and how it works. And if you don't understand how power works in a studio, you're going to get lost. Yep. You're going to be treated all in a very naive way. If you don't understand what a non-exclusive license is, if you don't understand what mechanicals are, all those sort of things, okay, you are going to get, well, let's say the world is going to become problematic for you. Yeah. So there are power relations at play all the time. Should we have the drum kit over here, or should we have the drum kit over here? That's going to affect the things that works. How do I get the drummer to shift their kit from there to there? That's a power relationship in some sort of way. So, note the shift here. These people are making decisions about this group's work. Move along some years, and where has the power shifted to? You can literally see it here. Yep. And that's come as a result of the collection of social capital, the collection of symbolic capital, the collection of cultural capital, and the increased level of economic capital that's attributed to this particular person. So there's power shifts in the negotiation of those things. So, we're nearly there, by the way. Okay, Anthony Giddens, this fellow here. This is Michel Foucault, you may have heard of either of those two. Giddens says power has a transformative capacity, so you can change things. And this capacity can be used by agents to enact change either in things or the actions of other people. And this capacity can be used to exercise power over other people and so constrain people and reduce their freedom, meaning their ability to make choice. At the same time, this complementarity is playing into this all the time, power also increases the freedom of action of the agents who possess it. What restricts one person enables another to do more. Yep. So you've got to understand how that works. So here's Foucault. If power were never anything but repressive, if it never did anything but to say no, do you really think one would be brought to obey it? Why are you all sitting here in the chairs listening to me? What are you hoping to gain from this? Is it something productive? Is it something positive? Or are you just here because you have to be here? You understand what he's saying? So, what makes power hold good, what makes it accepted, is simply the fact that it doesn't only weigh on us as a force that says no, but that it traverses and produces things. It induces pleasure, forms knowledge, produces discourse. It needs to be considered, this is why social capital is extremely important, it needs to be considered as a productive network which runs through the whole social body. Much more than as a negative instance whose function is repression. So forget all the big words for a second and just get this. Most of us think power works like that. Yeah? People at the top, people at the bottom. Everything getting the people at the bottom to do stuff for the people at the top. That's a classic hieratic definition of power right there. But it doesn't work like that. It actually works like that. And what you have to do, especially if you're in the studio or even an institution like this, identify where the really powerful nodes of power are and where they aren't. And try and figure that out. It might not be the producer that's the most powerful person in a studio situation. It might in fact be that drummer. It might be Colton Barrett. Especially if you're talking about rhythm. Yeah, it might not be the producer at all. Might not be the engineer. Might not even be the singer or the artist, the highest paid person in the room. It might be the person who has the highest cultural capital that's the most powerful. It might also be the person who knows more people than anybody else. And you can identify it here. So you need to think about power as a network that's in operation. And then you've got to be able to identify where those nodes of power are. Studio situation, in the university institution, or wherever it is that you're working. And that's a different conception of power to what most people have. So, it gets us all back to this, which I think you can see it demonstrated in this particular model. And for me, it also demonstrates what's happening here. You can actually see it at work. That's my eldest son, by the way. He's done really well in terms of his own musical career. And I've worked with him before, but there is a power relationship there. I just said father, son, didn't I? Yeah. And the older I get, the more powerful he becomes. So there's all sorts of things to be explained, and you can read about it yourself, and you can keep on reading about it. And of course, you can ask any questions that you want.
Thank you.
Can I just see the reference list one more time? Great. Perfect.
There's the first one. Good.
Thank you.
I've left this on the desktop and
Yeah,
post this around the students.
Oh, yeah, really, that's right.
I'll put it on the...
And that paper is, I'll transfer it across to your desktop as well.
Mm.
So that's from one of the ARP conferences in 2008, I think. You had a question?
Yeah. So you have expanded your knowledge about creativity. So you've worked as a musician first without any kind of real knowledge about how creativity works. And
Without being able to formally identify the terms that tell me what I've actually been doing.
right.
Yeah.
So now that you have more knowledge about it, how has it affected your creativity?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Right at the start of my musical journey, let's just say as a professional when I was 17, I read lots of magazines about rock artists and all that sort of stuff and so on. Watched all sorts of videos and blah blah blah, and I believed it happened in a particular way. So, guess what I would do? I would sit around waiting for the feeling to arrive. I would sit around waiting till an idea happened or whatever. And as I said to my son, if you practice sitting around waiting, guess what you get really good at? Waiting. But having gone through this process, we could sit down and we could write a song right now. I understand the structures that I'm dealing with. I understand rhyme schemes, melodic shape, all that sort of stuff. So what did I do when I started thinking about this material, which is quite a while ago? I then started, well, how do I apply it? That's what's really important. I say to my students, if the theories are not applicable to you and you can't use them, then throw them away. They're not of use. Yeah. So what do I do now? I go, okay, I need to understand what all the structures in the domain of songwriting are, and I need to understand that really well, and I need to listen a lot. Or, to put it in technical terms, I need to go through a process of domain immersion. Yeah, I need to immerse myself in songs. I'm not sure that this is probably because you might not be able to relate to it, but I've spent days in the water surfing. Yeah, and one of the things that you do when you also wait a lot because you're waiting for the sets to come through. So you're just sitting on your board and just bobbing up and down and doing a sort of meditative thing. And then the big sets come through and you can see these waves and you're reading the waves and whatever, and you get yourself in the right position and away you go. Now, at the end of the day, I've gone home so exhausted I couldn't even press the accelerator in my car. The energy's completely gone. And you lay down and shut your eyes, what do you see? You just see waves coming at you, literally. Because you've input, you've input, you've input, you've input. Now, if I want to write say I want to write a swing tune in New Orleans style, what would I do? Well, knowing about domain immersion is, I'm going to listen to weeks on end of nothing but swing. Do I want to write a particular song? I'm going to sit at the piano and I'm going to play. This is how this actually happened, by the way. And you put these two songs by side and see what happens. I'm Paul McCartney, I sit down at the piano, I want to write a ballad style song, I start playing Save the Last Dance for Me, and I keep playing it and playing it and playing it, and eventually, as you would have all done, you just add a little bit here, you take a little bit away there, you improvise on this bit, so on, because you're getting bored with Save the Last Dance for Me, and eventually it mutates, you start singing different lyrics, you've got the same sort of structure, same sort of chordal processes, etc., and at the end of that period you've got Hey Jude. Yeah? This is exactly how the song comes into being. So you've got to immerse yourself in the process. So that's one practical application. So yes, having been through all of this, I go, I'm not bothered by that. I need to know what this stuff is all about, and in order to do this thing, I'm going to dive deep into it. And once I dive deep into it, I can't help but have ideas.
Yes, I have a question. It's kind of a question about the future. Because
I'm not the person then.
no, I just what are your thoughts? Because this is interesting to me. Like as you're looking at power structures,
yes.
And kind of the picture that I've got of today's power structures in the music industry or creative culture industry,
yes.
Whatever, is that it's kind of in some ways very unequal. We all know what I mean, right?
Yep.
So certain types of people have the economic capital and
yes.
they have kind of the most contacts.
Yep.
And just a quick notion that most of the faces we saw in this presentation are male people.
Yes.
And so I just wonder, what are your thoughts about the future? Do you think that's going to change, and how will that happen?
Yeah, absolutely it will change. Why? Because things have always changed in the past. That system is not it's a representation. It's just a map of the world. It's not static.
Hmm.
The knowledge, every time that you add a new song to the domain shifts and changes. Every time someone like you or you comes into the field because you've absorbed the knowledge system, the field changes.
Yeah.
It's all systems are dynamic and active. They're mobile all the time. Yeah. So the world that you currently know is not going to be the world in 12 months' time or even in 2 years' time. That presentation from what was the woman's name? Yeah, the last presentation yesterday in the Swedish music industry.
Yeah, Linda.
Yes, yeah,
Thomas.
the you know, putting a stock exchange for music together.
Yeah.
That's a radical shift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if she's successful in convincing the field of that idea, then that will become part of the change in power structure.
Yeah.
It has to. So it's not as though the power structures. That's why Bourdieu calls it an arena of social contestation, where struggles for dominance take place. Those struggles are going on all the time. Yep. Sometimes people like you are powerful nodes, and sometimes people like you are powerful nodes. Yeah, and that's a constant shift. It might sort of stay a little bit stable for a while, and then you have a radical shift, and whatever, it might stay stable for a while. All cultures do this. It's dynamic and moving. You just have to be on the wave that's positive for you. At a certain point, be lucky enough to be riding that wave. But yeah, so power is always in effect. It might not be you that holds the power. It might be those people over there that you don't like hold the power. So there's a struggle going on.
Did you say that you had worked with marketing and music marketing as well?
I've done just about anything that I could to survive in the music industry because I have 6 children. Yes, that's a really good motivator.
Right.
I've been performing for a very long time. That's my specialisation. I'm a guitar player. Yeah. I needed songs, so I wrote songs. I needed to make music videos, so I learned how to make music videos. Yeah, enough to be able to make money out of that. I made documentaries. I've done all sorts of things. It's how I came to be a record producer. I wanted to make sure that I could record my own songs and maintain some control over them. And I got good enough at that for other people to pay me to do it, and so on. Yes. At one point, amongst doing all of these things, I managed a young band called Supersonic. I was the executive producer on a few of their recordings. I was also the producer and engineer. I made music videos for them, but I also managed them. And you know, as you're moving through a career like mine, you learn a hell of a lot. In fact, you've got to have everything open to be inputting all that information. So much to the point where I'll give you some stories actually from that period. I was also a music journalist. I do all those sorts of things. So I understand how the media works. That works to my advantage as a manager of a young band. I write a media release. How do I write a media release? I write that so that the music journalist does not have to change anything. I make their job exceptionally easy. They just cut and paste straight in. That becomes their story. Yes? That's how I write the media release. And I know how to write those really well. So they get. And I know that music journalists are exceptionally busy. Yes? So I make it as easy as I possibly can for them. And what happens for me as the manager of the young band, I get the story in. I tell the story the way I want to tell the story. But I do it through them because I know how they work. Yep. So there's one aspect of it, and that happens on a daily basis. I understand, since I'm a member of APRA, which is the Australasian Performing Rights Association, where my royalties come through. At some point, I understand that process well enough. The band that I'm managing gets an offer from a record company in Indonesia. I'm aware of how all these processes work because I've learned. I've made a hell of a lot of mistakes along the way. So what do? I ring someone I know at the Department of Foreign Affairs and I ask them about repatriation of royalties out of Indonesia. Does that work very well? Because I know that you can't get royalties that well out of Brazil, places like that. So you know, Indonesia in some ways is a cowboy country. Lots of things happen there that are beyond regulation. So they say, well, now it's really difficult. If you want to make money as a musician in Indonesia, you've got to go across and do concerts, and even then bringing the money back out of Indonesia into Australia is really hard. So do I sign that deal with a record company in Indonesia on behalf of this band? No, I don't. So, you know, gathering all of that information. So if you say marketing, that's as close as I've come. All those sorts of things. I know how to use the knowledge that I have for leverage to get things done for the people that I'm working for.
Yeah, because I can imagine that this theory is quite interesting in marketing as well.
Absolutely.
Applied.
Absolutely, yes. In fact, that first book that I talked about is cut up into various areas. Once I deal with the theory, the last half of the book applies it to radio, then television, then to film, then to photography, and of course music, but also in design and various other things as well. The beauty of the topic area that I'm researching, creativity, it's across every human activity. Yep. So yes, it does apply. From my point of view, it does apply to marketing as well.
I have one example I would like you to comment on. Örjan Fahlström, one of the teachers here, he has a story when he's a composer, big band leader, when he was driving his car and somebody else just came across and he pumped the horn and there was this called Honk the Horn Blues, and he told me just in a few seconds the whole song was completed. The rest of it was work.
Yes.
So the short moment of when you get the brilliant, and it's a really good song, but it took maybe a second or maybe oh, that's the song.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a lot to comment on that actually. A paper, one of my earliest papers was on the creation of Beatles Yesterday. Similar sort of story. Woke up, got out of bed, dragged a comb across his head.
Another one.
Yeah, that's all right. He got out of bed, there was a piano beside him, he fell in a half asleep state and just played the verse melody to Yesterday, like that, yeah? Okay, well what we don't understand, or most don't recognise there, and this is is that think about all of the immersion into swing tunes that composer would have had in order to understand. If it was, say, someone who was not into swing, and they were into reggae and they heard, would they have instantly thought of the song? Would they have understood the rhythm of what was happening with the horn? So there's all this preceding stuff going on, or what I call antecedent conditions need to be in place in order for someone to recognise that instantaneously, which is, I imagine, what he did. He went, yeah, there's the hook right there. But you can't have those instantaneous ideas without all of this preceding work. And then, once it happens, that composer would have gone flick, 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 flick through all the swing tunes in his head and go, I've never heard that before. Yeah? So testing it against the body of knowledge, verifying, in other words, what's going on. Now, put this in technical terms, and I don't necessarily agree with the linear nature of this, but Graham Wallace from the 30s and 40s, and his work's been used over and over again since, in things like design thinking and various other things. He said it goes like this: preparation, incubation, illumination, which is the point that you went like that, and then verification. So in other words, if you want to follow what the creative process is doing, you need to understand how people prepare to have the idea, how they think about it, whether it's at the conscious level or it's just below the surface or whatever, how ideas come into existence, and they come into existence because of the preceding stuff. And then verification is about, is this a crazy idea? Is it a good idea? What is it? And of course, that's really dependent on preparation. So if you think preparation, incubation, illumination, verification are all critical to it, but we just think creativity is having the idea. That's only one small part of the whole process. And the others really need to be in play in order for that to happen. Yeah.
One more question.
See, he's illuminating ideas over
yeah, exactly. I came to think about when we were talking about going through all your back catalogue of all the songs that you heard and all that. Have you ever experienced as a songwriter when you're kind of creating something really simple and genius kind of melody that this is going to be a hit song, and then you start doubting it because you thought like that, this is so simple, somebody must have thought of this before. Yes. Have you ever?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you comment on that?
I can indeed. Yeah. It's very disappointing.
Yeah. But I mean, you don't actually know, but you're kind of just feeling it.
Yeah, you're feeling it. You're in what Csikszentmihalyi calls a flow experience. You're right inside all of that. Time disappears, space disappears. You're just concentrating on the work, and yes, you come up with a brilliant song. that same example, Paul McCartney in Yesterday, he had the idea because the melody is beautiful, he recognises it as fantastic, can't identify whose it is. He spends about 6 to 8 months going around all of his friends, colleagues, etc., playing this song to death, trying to get someone to say, it's this. Eventually he kind of goes, nobody's heard of this before, it must be mine.
Scrambled eggs, oh my darling, how I love your legs.
That's it.
Yeah, that's,
So he plays it on the set of Hard Day's Night. You know, sent the director crazy because he just kept playing this thing, but trying to verify that it was an original melody. I've sat down and, I mean, just a couple of examples. I've sat down and come up with a fantastic Neil Young song called Winter Long, except I called it something else with a different set of lyrics. I didn't realise at the time that that's what it was. I can also remember writing another song which I had to actually rewrite the lyric and the melody at the front because, you know, I played it, I'd arranged it, we'd taken it to the band, we were just about to record it, and my brother heard me playing it in the lounge room, and he instantly said, well, that's the Man at Work song. At that particular point, so just you had to reorganise the whole thing. So yeah, I think it happens all the time. In fact, there's another good Beatles story about Ringo was really interested in writing songs. Why? He's hanging around two of the best songwriters in the world, and he keeps bringing songs in. But you know, he stopped after a while because Paul and John would say, "Oh, that's blah blah blah. You've just rewritten Bob Dylan song. You've just rewritten whatever." So I think, well, my colleagues and I are just about to put in a research grant on failure and creativity.
Yeah, interesting.
That we need the failures. You know, without the failures, we don't learn. We don't, you know, find out what's novel and all that sort of process. So, but we tend to, and especially in a game like this, just highlight, concentrate on success. But in order for it to be successful, you need to understand failure as well. How it works, how it doesn't work. Now, there's one more thing that you need to understand. We were talking before about little c creativity, big C, pro C creativity. There's another way to think of this. There's a continuum between what you do as an individual and how you become part of the larger culture. And Margaret Bowden, the woman that I mentioned early on, says that instead of thinking about little c creativity, everyday creativity, and this big C thing that, you know, all these genius figures do, she said, just think about, let's call it P, or psychological or personal creativity, and let's call this one historical creativity. This is Einstein and whatever. And the thing that's important for me about that was she said that you cannot be historically creative unless you've first been personally creative. So, and the lesson for me out of that is that you need to be able to, the activities that you do, the things that you go through are the same as Einstein or McCartney or whatever. It's the culture that's selecting those people. This is the power struggle again. So the lesson to be learnt there is that you can produce work like that. You need to interact with the field, the social network, in order to get your work to the H creative stage. But don't worry about that. Just be as personally creative as you possibly can. And just to give you an example of what she's talking about, you know, I can be beavering away in my office, beavering away, and I go, I've got it. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. And I race out into the corridor shouting as I go down, I've solved the problem of energy. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. And one of my colleagues comes out the door and says, I think Einstein beat you to that. Einstein's historically creative. I'm, of course, not. But at my personal level, I'm just as creative as Einstein was. Until I go out into the culture. And it decides whether Einstein beat me to it or not. Yep. So the lesson, of course, is that you're just as capable.
I had another, but I'll ask this. How aware do you think we have to be of what is historically creative when we create? Or should we completely disregard what's happening historically? Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things there. I think if we come back to the concept of habits, having a feel for the game of what works or not. Yep. So let's hang on to that for a second. And the other one is, have you come across the concept of flow? Yes? Okay, well, flow kind of works like this. That on one side you've got skill, and on the other side you've got challenge. Yes? let's say that's the flow experience right there. If your skills are really high and the challenge is really low, you don't go into the flow experience, you just experience boredom, which detracts from the flow experience. If the challenge is really high, but your skill level is really low, you're anxious, so that detracts from the flow experience. It's when your skill level and the challenge meet each other that you go into the experience. Now, let's equate that to habitus as well. I think that experience of being creative while you're in the middle of it, yes, well, remember before I said about you lose track of time and all those sorts of things, which is what I love about it. I love being inside that experience. And, I'll do whatever I can to get back there, or that's why I keep writing songs, yeah? I don't think that that's conscious. I think that when you are in the experience of creating it, like you are just in the experience, yeah? Maybe later on, as I've done, as these people have done, you can go back and analyse what happened, or you can use those ideas to get you into the experience. But I think when you're in the experience, you're just doing it. Do you remember the car driving example? Mm-hmm. You're not there, are you? Who was driving the car? Well, of course you were, and it's the same with the creative situation. So I don't. Sometimes you'll drag yourself out of it and go, I can't get that verse, I can't get the verse. So you go read a book or whatever. You know the mechanisms to get you back in there. But I think while it's happening, I don't think it's happening consciously at all. And I think that experience of it is why people have gone, it just comes to me, I don't know how it got here. Yeah? But I think we do know how it got there. But you need to absorb all of that stuff into you and then forget it. Just go and do it. But with the knowledge that you know, I can get into that experience if I put a lot of input into what I'm doing. And then just let it go. Let it happen.
Thank you, Philip.